Good afternoon. Maybe it's good morning for you, or good night, or good evening. I don't know. It's afternoon for me. And welcome to the Wide Awake podcast. This is the very first episode. This has been long in the works. It's been a passion project of mine. You know, the name, the topics, the research, all of it means a lot to me. And I'm glad to finally get things working. I'm your host, Yusuf. No need for a last name yet. And this show is going to be mainly for current world news, diluting them for a broader audience, hopefully without any politicized commentary. I try to keep everything neutral, everything unopinionated, unless it is objectively a horrible thing or objectively a good thing. And this week's biggest piece of news by far was the American shutdown finally ending. It's been 40 days, I believe. This is the longest American shutdown in history. And essentially, what a shutdown of the US government means is both parties, which make up the Senate, so all the senators, cannot make a decision on the year's governmental budget. And as such, if they can't make a decision on the budget and they keep delaying it each time, nobody gets paid, no department gets paid, no ministry gets paid, no governmental body or federal body gets its money. What that means is all its employees are unpaid. And if it's a very important governmental structure, they are not gonna have the money to pay for their workers. And so there's gonna be a shortage of workers. Or maybe some people get furloughed, which means you work voluntarily or you're forced to work without pay, with the promise that once the money is made, they will pay you back in full for all the work you've done. This is necessary in things like airports, where you constantly need airport traffic controllers. If you don't have them, you can't have airports. No more transport, the economy dies. Boom. So they gotta furlough airport traffic controllers, security officers, etc. Also for things like the police, the military and stuff, you gotta keep those people in. You can't just tell them to F off and then you're left with no military or no police. In fact, it's been so detrimental that about 90% of the Environmental Protection Agency workers have been furloughed. Over 80% of the Department of Education and Commerce have been furloughed. Labor over 70%, Housing and Urban Development over 70%, Department of State and Energy over 60%. These are crazy numbers. Extremely crazy numbers. The departments with the least workers furloughed were the Department of Treasury with only 2% and Veteran Affairs with only 3%, with about 2 million overall workers being furloughed, I believe. Now, the interesting thing is, and this shows you how some departments have completely useless workers. Say the Department of Treasury. They had 81k workers. After the shutdown, they furloughed only 1.7k. That means that 80,000 other workers weren't doing work that was so important, so necessary, and so remarkable as to be furloughed. That's pretty funny in my opinion. Same for the Department of Veteran Affairs, boasting over 460,000 workers, furloughing only 14,000. Wonder why. What else do we have? Another thing, actually, that's pretty good since the shutdown ended is people relying on SNAP can finally eat again. SNAP is an American program for, let me see the name, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. What this essentially does, basically food stamps, it lets about 40 million Americans benefit from necessary nutrition without straining their grocery lists. It's very necessary because most of the US population struggles to keep up with daily spending and especially nutrition. And what you don't want is a hungry population. So about 40 million Americans get to benefit from SNAP. But the worst thing in the long term is the shutdown mainly happened because Republicans and Democrats couldn't really agree on how to proceed with the spending of this year, with Republicans wanting to cut spending on things like healthcare, affordable healthcare. Trump started this way back in the not 1940, what was I saying? Trump started this way back in July of this year by passing the one big blue beautiful bill, the BBBB. What it essentially does is many policy changes, but chief among them is the hiking up the prices of healthcare premiums, essentially making healthcare less affordable for the poor man, which is already very unaffordable in the United States. Again, the reason you can buy cheap insulin and cheap hepatitis medication and other cheap and life-changing medication in parts like Europe and Africa and Asia is because Americans pay 100 times what you pay for it. I mean, if we grab the statistics real quick and check out the insulin price in Europe versus US. So, in every single other country, you pay around $9 on average on insulin. In the US, you pay an average of $98 on insulin. That's over 10 times more. 12, I think, actually. That is a joke. That is an absolute joke. It gets even more egregious for other medication. I mean, if you pay something for $50 in Europe, you might have to pay $5,000 up to $50,000 for it in the US. It's crazy what they do. And it's not the fault of the government, it's the fault of pharmaceutical companies relying on the US's people, essentially, to spend money and take debts to pay them. Very sad. But that's how pharmaceutical companies keep medication cheap and affordable in other nations. It's a sacrifice of the few for the many, but in this case, it's sacrifice of the many for the many, because the US population is not small. They're like 300 million people. And I'm not sure how many people live in Europe, but the US population are a pretty sizable chunk if they were in Europe. Probably more than half. Let's look at the Europe population. Yeah, Europe has 744 million people. The US would be more than half. Very interesting. So again, one of the reasons it was delayed is because they couldn't agree on how to handle healthcare premiums, and sadly 8 Democrats caved in, voted with the Republicans, and the bill passed, and the shutdown ended, but at the cost of something we will only find out in a few months. Now, more news. We have Amelia Vanderhorst, an Australian teenage girl who was charged with $135,000 for sticking a pair of googly eyes on a very ugly piece of artwork. There's like this artwork and sculpture in Australia called Cast in Blue, I believe. Very ugly thing. This girl just stuck a pair of googly eyes on it. It looked so much better, by the way. So much better. And the police got angry. They tried to take them out, but they made it worse somehow. How could you botch a glue removal? Absolutely messed it up. The thing now looks very ugly, like you ripped its eyes out, which they did. They did rip its eyes out. And it's left looking terrible. Even worse than it actually was before she stuck the pair of googly eyes. Poor Amelia. Justice for Amelia. Now, last piece of news before the most important corner of the day is the... How do I even begin this? This is horrible. So, let's go back in time. World War II. America tries to help liberate Europe. They do. And among the American military, there was a sizable percentage of black people. Back then, people of color were not treated very nicely. We're talking about the 40s and late 30s. Segregation was still very well a thing. The KKK was still very well a thing. Racism was very normal. It was the norm. And despite that, there were many brave black men in the US military who helped liberate Europe. And they had a memorial in the Netherlands with informational panels about them, portraits, documentaries, and actual, grave sites. And recently, the US department responsible for maintaining those memorial sites very quietly and almost overnight removed 2 informational panels with many names of black soldiers who died in World War II for no reason at all. They said the reason was, oh hey, it was part of our usual rotation and due to space constraints we couldn't leave them there anymore. What do you mean space constraints? The way they word it, it's as if every day there are new names they have to add and then, space is taken and they lack space and they have to remove them. But no, the war ended 80 years ago. Surely you don't need space anymore. Surely that's like a done deal, right? All the names are there and there is no space constraints. A very silly reason, no less. And when they were accused of being racist, blah, 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 all they said is like, well, not actually racist. We left a documentary about a black person there, and we also left 2 portraits. So we're not really racist. We just look racist. And we did something that's very kinda racist, but who cares? This sort of falls under the theme of the American government after Trump being very much against DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as a theme and in all the forms it can take. Even the Netherlands itself, the Dutch people have gotten angry about this and they protested to, put the things back, be more respectful. Because if the US doesn't value its men who died protecting another country, well, that country does. That should be all. Now, the current war in Sudan. Now, if you look at Sudan, Sudan is actually a country that has been plagued by war for a very long time. In fact, since its independence, all the way back in 1955. They are generally characterized as fights between the central government, which wants to expand and dominate people of the periphery. Sudan has I believe, a majority Muslim Arab population alongside many countless tribes living around the Nile River. Of course, these desires to expand by the central government have been met with raising allegations of marginalization. Kingdoms and great powers based along the Nile River have fought against the people of inland Sudan for centuries. Since at least the 18th century, central governments have attempted to regulate and exploit the undeveloped southern and inland regions of Sudan. Some sources describe the conflict as an ethno-religious one, where the Arab Muslim central government's pursuits to impose Sharia law in 1983 on non-Muslim southerners led to violence and eventually to the civil war. Sudan was actually a British colony. You heard me right? They administered the northern and southern provinces separately. The south was to be held to be more similar to the other East African colonies, so you have Kenya, Tanganyika, and Uganda. So again, what this would mean is more westernized colonies, more Christian colonies, while the north was more similar to Arabic-speaking Egypt. The northern Arabs were prevented from holding positions of power in the south, with its African traditions. and trade was discouraged between the two areas. Now, I just want you to know that if Sudan remained a full single country, not split into south and north, it would be, I believe, the only Arab nation to achieve full self-nutritional sufficiency. They could produce enough wheat to feed their entire population and export to other Arabic countries. So seeing the state Sudan is in today, where people are dying in the hundreds of thousands due to famine, is a very, very sad thing to read. In 1946, the British gave in to northern pressure between the two areas. To integrate the two areas. Arabic was made the language of administration in the south, and northerners began to hold positions there. Now, this angered the south, who were trained in English, and they resented the change, as they were kept out of government. After decolonization, most power was given to the northern elites based in Khartoum, causing unrest in the south. The British moved towards granting Sudan independence, but did not invite southern Sudanese leaders to participate in negotiations during the transitional period in the 1950s, the post-colonial government of 1953. The Sudanization Committee had only 6 Southerners in its 800 senior administrative positions. If you run the maths real quick, I'm gonna grab a calculator. 8 divided by 600. 6 divided by 800. That will be... Goodness me, that's 0.75% of the entire committee was Southern. Yeah. Oh boy. And now, before actually diving into what exactly happened, which wars were fought, we want to get familiarized with the sides here. So we have the SAF. You're going to hear this name quite frequently. The Sudanese Armed Forces, which is the main military branch of the government and the government's way to fight back against rebellions, against revolutions, against attempted coup d'etat. So the first Sudanese civil war took place, started on 18th of August 1955, all the way to the 27th of March 1972. So a whole 17 years, well, almost 17 years. During the course of this war, nearly 1 million people died. It was also, by the way, known as the Anyanya Rebellion, or Anyanya 1, which is the name of the rebels. And Anyanya is a term in the Madi language, which means snake venom. So this war was fought mainly with the goal of obtaining more regional autonomy for southern Sudan, more representation. That's a very simple demand, and the government was not willing to concede. The war was divided mainly into 4 major stages. We had the initial guerrilla warfare, the initial bloodshed. Then we had the creation of the Anyanya insurgency. And then actually political breakdown and strife in the north. And then the eventual establishment of the Southern Sudan Liberation Movement. It's a horrible war, but thankfully, nearing the end, we actually got to the Addis Ababa Agreement, which aimed to completely dispel the tensions, but it eventually failed to do so as it only addressed some of the issues stated by Southern Sudan, and the breakdown of this agreement later led to reigniting the North-South conflict during the Second Sudanese Civil War, which lasted from 1983 to 2005. Again, between the Sudanese Armed Forces and against the Southern Sudan's People Liberation Army, the Anyanya 2, a few foreign agents from Uganda, from Libya, from Eritrea, from Ethiopia, and the SSLM, which is the South Sudan Liberation Movement. Now, it's also important to note, while the war started in the southern region, it quickly spread to the Nuba Mountains and the Blue Nile. And it also became one of the longest civil wars on record. But it resulted in the independence of South Sudan 6 years after the war, which is great. But what isn't so great is that roughly 2 million people died as a result of the war, famine, and disease caused by the conflict. 4 million people in southern Sudan were displaced at least once, normally repeatedly during the war. And civilian death toll is actually one of the highest of any war since World War II, and was marked by numerous human rights violations, including slavery and mass killings. Slavery in the Big 25 is a very crazy thing to hear, and yes, it did happen, and we're gonna dive into that actually. So, there was the militarization of children, child soldiers. In 2005, an agreement required that child soldiers must be demobilized and sent home, but the SPLA, the Sudan People Liberation Army, claimed to have let go 16,000 of its child soldiers in 3 years. However, international observers, the UN and Global Report, have found demobilized children have been often re-recruited by the SPLA. And as of 2004, there were between 2,500 up to 5,000 children serving in the SPLA, which promised again to demobilize all children by the end of 2010. Not sure that happened. There was also, more grimly, a revival of slavery, where during the war, the Sudanese armed forces revived the use of enslavement as a weapon against the South, and particularly Christian prisoners of war, on the basis that Islamic law purportedly allowed it. The Murahalin, which were armed Bagara herders, essentially, from what I understood to be, they were camel herders, and we're actually going to talk about them very soon, were enlisted as militia by the Sudanese government as a low-cost part of its counterinsurgency plan against the rebel Sudan People's Liberation Movement, SPLM, which was identified with the Dinka tribe of southern Sudan. So these militias, the Murahalin, the armed Bagara herders, often destroyed Christian villages, executed all their males, and then took the women and children as slaves. The first slave raid on the Dinka took place in February 1986. 2,000 women and children were taken. In a second raid in February 1987, 1,000 women and children were taken. Once the raiders acquired enough women and children, they would distribute the captives between themselves and their families. The raids continued every year after. Dinka girls kept in northern Sudan households were used as sex slaves. Some of them were sold in Libya. Western visitors noted that at slave markets, 5 or even more slaves could be bought with one rifle. Near the peak of the Civil War in 1989, female black slaves were sold for $90 at slave markets. Some years later, the price of an average female black slave had dropped to $15. Many Western organizations traveled to Sudan with funds to purchase and emancipate these enslaved captives. This is a butchery of human rights, essentially. Horrible. South Sudan became an independent state on the 9th of July 2011, following 98.8% support for independence in a January 2011 referendum. It is the most recent sovereign state with widespread recognition as of 2025, so basically the youngest country. South Sudan descended into a civil war, though, again, from 2013 to 2020, enduring rampant human rights abuses, including forced displacement, ethnic massacres, and killings of journalists by various parties. Now, if you haven't noticed already, but there's a trend with ethnic cleansing in Sudan. where everyone wants to kill each other, but it's more so non-Arabs being murdered by Arabs in Sudan. Now, we're gonna talk about the Janjaweed. We are actually not sure about the etymology of the word. Some people say it could be composed of Jan or Jinn in Arabic, which are these genies, demons, or sometimes meaning insane, and Ajawid, which is an Arabic word meaning horseman. So it could be translated as devils on horseback, but it could also be coming from the Persian word Janjavi, meaning warrior. Or it could be a portmanteau of all three words. Maybe it's the warriors, the devil warriors on horseback. Whatever it means, they were truly devils, and they were not honorable warriors. These people are a Sudanese Arab nomad militia group operating in the Sahel region, specifically in Sudan, particularly in Darfur and eastern Chad. Darfur, we're gonna come back to that actually, a very important place. They have been speculated to be active in Yemen as well, over 10,000 actually. According to the United Nations, the Janjaweed membership consists of Arab nomad tribes, of Abala Arabs mainly, who are employed in camel herding, with a significant recruitment from the Bagara of earlier. Now, these Janjaweed have been recruited by Sudan's president, who actually led Sudan for a very long time, I believe from 1989 all the way to 2019 or something, Omar al-Bashir, to commit what could only be described as genocide and crimes against humanity in Darfur. The war in Darfur, which was also nicknamed the Land Cruiser War, was a major armed conflict in the Darfur region of Sudan that began in February 2003 when the Sudan Liberation Movement, the SLM, and the Justice and Equality Movement, the JEM, rebel groups began fighting back against the government of Sudan, which they accused of oppressing Darfur's non-Arab population. The government responded to the attacks by carrying out a campaign of ethnic cleansing against Darfur's non-Arabs. This resulted in the death of hundreds of thousands of civilians and the indictment of Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir by the International Criminal Court. This genocide was so horrible that over 2.7 million people were displaced and around 300,000 civilian deaths occurred. It's important to note that after their work in Darfur, many years later, Omar al-Bashir reorganized the Janjaweed as the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, Quwwat ad-Dam al-Sharia. He also announced that the RSF would be placed under the command of the Janjaweed's commander Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti. Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo is a man you should keep in mind, as we will talk about him very soon. In 2019, a coup d'etat happened in Sudan, where in the afternoon, late afternoon, of 11th of April 2019, President Omar al-Bashir was overthrown by the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, after popular protests demanded his departure. At that time, the army, led by Ahmed ibn Auf, toppled the government and national legislature and declared a state of emergency in the country for a period of 3 months, followed by a transitional period of 2 years before an agreement was reached later. In 2021, another coup d'etat happened, and this time, the Sudanese military, again the SAF, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, took control of the government of Sudan in a military coup. At least 5 senior government figures were initially detained. Civilian Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok refused to declare support for the coup, and as such, he was put on house arrest That same day, internet outages happened all the way in Sudan, and the Sovereignty Council was dissolved, a state of emergency was put in place, and the whole thing was wrapped up with Hamdok's cabinet being put in jail, most of them, without access to their families or lawyers or even their location. The jails were in secret locations, obviously. All of this mess led to the current Sudanese civil war starting in 2023. Important to note that in its history, Sudan has had over 20 civil wars. Just so you know. Now, since April 15th, 2023, a civil war has been fought in Sudan between two rival factions in the military government. One of them, the SAF, led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the main star of the show in the 2021 Sudan Civil War, and the RSF, formerly the Janjaweed, led by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, or Hemeti. Now, when the fighting started, it mainly took place in the capital Khartoum, where the conflict began with the Battle of Khartoum, and in the Darfur region. Many civilians in Darfur have been reported dead as part of the Masalit massacres, which have been described as ethnic cleansing or genocide. Sudan has been described as facing the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Nearly 25 million people are experiencing extreme hunger, according to UN estimates. And on the 7th of January 2025, the United States said it had determined that the RSF and allied militias committed genocide. Thank you, but that's a bit too late. They started committing genocide 20 years ago in Darfur. This is no surprise. Now, who's Hemeti, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, Musa? He's a Sudanese military officer and politician who's currently the chairman of the Presidential Council of the Government of Peace and Unity, essentially the leader of the murderous and genocidal RSF. And you might also know him for having ties to Dubai and the broader UAE, as he used the RSF to take over gold mines in Sudan and arrest rival Janjaweed leader Musa Hilal in November 2017, with the result that Hemeti became the biggest gold trader in all of Sudan via his company Al Junaid, which is currently led by his brother. By 2019, Al Junaid actually expanded to deal in investment, mining, transport, car rental, iron, and steel. I think the only thing they aren't selling yet is people. In April 2019, Hemeti was described by Alex Duvall as one of the richest men in Sudan. Important to note that the gold mine in Sudan was sent to Dubai in the UAE, where Hemeti kept much of his money, which he used to fund his paramilitaries. In 2019, Global Witness reported that the UAE was a key supplier of military equipment to the RSF. Both Hemeti and Abdel Fattah al-Burhan had ties to the Putin regime in Russia as well, though it is not sure if Russia is helping either side. Most importantly, Russia only wanted the gold in Sudan. The UAE had helped Hemeti to strengthen his military through many business deals that were channeled through Dubai. UAE had also paid huge sums of money to Hemeti to send thousands of troops to Yemen to fight their proxy wars. The Yemen war had hugely benefited General Hamdan. Hemeti had also visited Russia during the Russian invasion of Ukraine to sign a partnership deal with the Wagner Group in exchange for giving them the license to mine gold in Sudan. Oh boy. According to Western officials, General Hamdan's wealth includes livestock, real estate, and private security firms, with much of the money held in Dubai. It helped Hemeti build his paramilitary forces, which, as of 2023, were better equipped than the regular Sudanese military. Now, the reason you may have seen Sudan recently in the news is the fall of al-Fashir, as in October 2025, the RSF took complete control of the headquarters of the main ASF base in Al Fasher. On October 28th, General Al Burhan confirmed that the SAF had withdrawn from Al Fasher, confirming RSF control over the city. Following the fall of the city, more than 2,500 civilians were summarily executed by the RSF. And these aren't just normal executions. These are murders that you can see from space. This is a genocide you can see from a satellite. There are pictures of hospitals with piles of bodies in front of them. And there are more videos of people forced to bury themselves, dig their own graves, being killed in front of their parents, women having gasoline dumped on them before they're set on fire. Just horrible pictures, satellite pictures of piles of bodies and rivers of blood. It's a terrible thing going on right now in Al Fasher, and it's almost reminiscent of the first 24 hours of the Rwandan genocide, because the sheer speed at which this is being executed is remarkable. And as of November 2025, the 5th of November, there was a communications blackout in the city, and it's limiting information spread, but it's expected that the number of individuals killed is actually undercounted, and Sky News claims that the analysts estimate that tens of thousands of people have been killed. Al Fasher's resistance committee stated that many of those living in Al Fasher's core were also killed. This is also basically happening in the Darfur, as Al Fasher is the capital of northern Darfur. That was it, basically, pretty much for today's Sudan corner. And it was honestly a very grim read. But that's the current state of humanity. And now to change the tone for hopefully something lighter, hopefully something a bit more fun, we have monkeys sticking grass up their butts. Now, this isn't a very new thing, as back in 2010, a monkey called Julie in the Zambian Chimpunchi Wildlife Orphanage Sanctuary was seen sticking a piece of grass into her ear, seemingly for no reason, and she left it there. Other monkeys found this humorous, especially her son, and they decided to pick up the habit. Even after her death, the trend continued. And as of very recently, I believe within the same wildlife orphanage sanctuary, the monkeys, specifically chimpanzees, started sticking the grass up their butts. So 15 years later, the trend evolved or devolved to sticking grass up your butt. And what this highlights, besides the absolute silliness of monkeys, is actually a very developed culture and social learning, and a desire to pick up trends and evolve with trends. So I think it's very nice, actually. And we have a Kick streamer called, what was her name again? Jackie. Yeah, Jackie. She was kicked off of Kick. What a sentence. Because she crashed her car while live streaming. Now, Kick, if you don't know what that is, you probably know Twitch, a streaming platform. Kick is basically Twitch, but for degenerate people, because it's easier to do things that are usually banned on Twitch. Kick has a much more lax terms of service, lets you do whatever you want, as long as you don't really just commit crimes, essentially. Now, what Jackie did here was she was live streaming while driving her car. Pretty unsafe, but could be safe if you have a cameraman and you're not really doing anything on your own. However, what Jackie is doing is putting the phone on her dashboard or the camera on her dashboard and using her phone to chat while driving, which eventually led to a live streamed car crash. Her first reaction when crashing the car wasn't to get out, wasn't to look at exactly what happened outside. She just immediately gets in the no way face and looks at the camera. Like, yeah, sure, buddy. Even Kick, the degenerate platform, just kicked her out. So, good riddance, and hopefully we see less degenerate streamers driving cars, walking in the streets, and causing trouble. That's about it for today. Actually, a pretty long episode. I expected this to be like 15 minutes, 20 minutes at most, maybe. But the Sudan part was actually pretty long and hopefully informative. If you have any questions, do comment them out. I will be very happy to respond. This was your host, Yusuf, from the Wide Awake podcast. Hope you have a wonderful day and goodbye.